that's fantastic. The last lecture in the series is the next final Thursday in April, and it's me talking about families and how I'm trying to avoid a genealogy lecture, right? Because we're trying to focus on local history, and we're trying to focus on the way in which families operate within a local history context. So hopefully the focus of the lecture will be on the way in which you could be looking at families, not necessarily your own, but families in general, and the way individuals and families operate within sort of a local context. And so that's going to be then the final lecture in the series. I suppose I could just abuse my position as standing up here to say that, I don't know if anybody was here last month. I'm going to talk about this a bit more next month. But you might remember that we were talking about poor old Matilda OUI, who turned out to be my second, great cousin. I'm pretty sure she is. Although, and I have spent some time trying to piece the family connection together, and I haven't quite gotten the link where our two families join. But I can't see how she's not related to us. I mean, she's a non-subscribing Presbyterian, and my family is, and she's from the Coldwater area, and my family is. Now, what you don't know is that the minute I got home, after having a nice drink in the local hostelry, I immediately went onto the website and started to browse through the 1901 and 1911 censuses to see if we could find a bit more about Matilda. And indeed, we did. And I just wanted to make sure I get my papers right so I don't lose track. So for those of you who are interested in what happens to Matilda, I think we would all have probably thought that someone who is involved in a child murder case would probably have maybe left the district. Certainly this is quite a common phenomenon throughout other aspects of history. And I've come across cases of people who have been involved in disgraceful circumstances in the past and then they emigrate to Canada or that kind of thing. Now, what was so surprising was that in the 1901 census, Matilda is actually still there, living in the same townland. Her father seems to have died in the meantime, but she's living with the woman who's described as her stepmother. She's still not married, and her stepmother is described as a widow. Now, her age is put down here as 35, and her stepmother, is described as 82. Okay? Now, I'm still puzzling over that, and how that all worked out and how that happened. Because it's a stepmother, it's a second marriage, which maybe took place, clearly a long time after she was born. But so if she's 35 in 1901, that puts her birth around about 1866, which really kind of makes her contemporary of my great-grandmother. So I'm sure, who's only 8 years younger than her. So I'm thinking that, they were both non-subscribing Presbyterians. There is only one non-subscribing Presbyterian church in that area, which is called Top of the Town, or First Larne, or Larne Old Congregation, depending. So they must have gone there together, so they must have known each other, I think. But, again, it's still all speculation. What gets more interesting is what happens when you look at the 1911 census. Because there's still a Matilda OUI listed, living in the same townland, Hightown. Now the only problem is that she's described as a domestic servant, okay, and living with a farmer, Robert McDowell, and his family. But her age here is given as 61. Right? And you're going, no, that's not right. She should have been 45. Okay? So, I don't know what to think now, really. So what I did today was, I went to because clearly what needs to happen in order to join the two families is that you need another set of records in order to make the connections. Okay, so the census is only going to take me so far. It gives me a single generation. It's like a snapshot in time. And in that respect, it's quite static. Okay, so if you're going to try and view motion of families and change over time, you obviously need to look at different records. So I looked through the baptismal registers for Latter non-subscribing Presbyterian. And I browsed around 1866, thinking I'm going to find my Matilda. But she doesn't appear. So Matilda, who is 27 and convicted or charged with child murder in 1893, she's certainly not, her baptism or her birth is not registered in Latter non-subscribing, which I think is another problem. Because I did the next thing, right, which is what you would have done. Well, it's only about 30 births a year, I'll just keep working backwards, right? Until I thought, calculate, okay, I've always assumed that her age of 61 in the 1911 census is incorrect, but what if that's right? Okay? So I moved back, and then sure enough, there in 1849, which would have made her 61 in the 1911 census, is Matilda Ogilvy, who's born to Alexander Ogilvy and Martha Caldwell. So I still have a problem. Okay? I've confirmed now that my 61-year-old domestic servant, was born in the local area, but I still haven't been able to confirm whether or not our Matilda Ogilvy is the same, or if there's two, which seems extraordinary given the names, but there you go. So that's my problem now. So I'm a little bit farther forward, but still haven't managed to resolve, really, I suppose, the identity of Matilda Ogilvy, who was charged with child murder in 1893. Okay, so I don't know when she was born, and I don't know what happened to her. And they said, I don't know why there aren't two in the census in 1901, because there should be, right? Like, why does one pop up in 1901 and the other one pops up 10 years later? Which doesn't make sense. So anyway, but an interesting problem nevertheless, and I think a real lesson about making sure you got your names straight and all the rest of it. The other thing I was going to say as well, just to very quickly abuse my position up here, is to say that that when we started, I don't know if anybody was here at the very beginning and has stuck it out the entire time. If so, put your hand. Anybody here been, whoa, really? That's fantastic. I'm so well, thank you. I'm really touched. So you know that back at the very beginning I said that one of the things I wanted to do with my own kind of local study was to explore this family myth that we had, that the great-grandpa who was mentioned on my postcard, on my family postcard of Kilwater Castle, had been a gardener on the estate. And I think about 2 or 3 months in, I'd gotten convinced that was a big myth, and that hadn't happened, because the family that I was coming across were all being described in the censuses and elsewhere as agricultural laborers, or farm servants. And it's relentless. Every single Ogilvy you come across in Kilwater is described in this way. None of them are rich, none of them have property, no one is a farmer even. No one has a trade or a skill until you get to the later ones. And they've all then become textile workers working in the factory in Millbrook. So again, they still haven't really risen up through the ranks, So there's no distant relatives, I'm sure, who have left me any money, alas. Nevertheless, my mom was over visiting me, and so we kind of have spent a few days browsing around, and she prompted me to get out that old pile of family papers that I had in the corner. And it turned out that I'd actually taken some notes from the baptismal register of First Larn. And the long and short of it is that hurrah, my great-grandmother, her older brother, John, is described in the baptismal register as his father's residence as being Kilwater Castle, although his occupation is described as laborer. Okay, so he's not sleeping in the comfy bed with the satin sheets or anything. He's probably living in an outhouse on the estate. And what I've discovered is that Kilwater Castle was tenanted almost right up to the walls. And so it's possible that he either lived in a house that was and worked there. He had 7 children by his first marriage and 3 children by his second marriage. And so it seems tentative that we can possibly say that he worked in the garden on the Kilwater Castle estate. So whether or not that is quite as something to be as proud of, I don't know. Certainly not the head gardener, anyway. But so that was kind of fun too. So the process proceeds. And what's quite interesting actually as well is that the minister at the time was Classon Porter, who I'm sure some of you have come across or heard his name, because he was a great antiquarian and wrote extensively about life in Larne and in North Antrim, and lived at Ballygally Castle, which is now that hotel on the North Antrim coast, and things. And so I was just looking, because it's clear that his antiquarian interests extended to the way he filled in his baptismal register. Because in the column after our father's occupation, there was then a little column that said residence of the father, and then there was a column for remarks. And he filled in quite frequently. And of the sort of 30 baptisms that he would conduct every year, he would almost always have a comment about 2 or 3 of them. Most of the time it was illegitimate, father fled to Scotland, or other, pro-male statements. Yes, baptized in mother's house, father not present, they were afterwards married. Okay, so no shotgun wedding there. Father ran off to England. So there's no hiding any of this kind of thing in Classon Porter's baptismal registers. But what was also quite interesting is that if the birth took place in unusual circumstances, he would record what days were. And I think they provide a fascinating vignette, and I'm hoping to use some of this work in my talk for next month. So, for example, he says he's clearly got the birth of someone who's not from his parish because, quote-unquote, parents on a visit to friends in Kilwater, and baby arrives unexpectedly. He baptizes the daughter of my nephew, who was serving with the militia, staying at Inver Lodge and on leave from India. He says about another birth, this is the 19th child born to this couple, not all, however, born alive. You think, whew, wow. He says, posthumous child, father killed some time ago of a fall from his horse. Child born on the day that the account came of the death of its father at sea, 2 days sail out on his way home. So you get a sense as well of the tragedy of life too, and the precariousness of it in the mid-19th century, and sort of terrible things that could happen as well. So anyway, so hopefully more stories from baptismal registers in Kilwater next month.